It was a quiet Thursday morning, the kind that feels like it could go unnoticed. The sky was pale blue, the air crisp, and the sound of birdsong filled the neighborhood like background music to a movie no one was watching. Lila tightened her backpack straps and stepped onto the sidewalk. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with a curious mind and a heart that noticed things others missed. Today was the first time she was walking to school alone. Her mom had kissed her on the forehead and waved from the porch, and Lila had promised to stick to the usual path and not get distracted. But it didn't take long for something to catch her eye. Halfway down the block, she saw it, just a flicker of movement near the edge of someone's yard. At first, she thought it was a squirrel, but when she turned her head, she froze. A small puppy, covered in dirt and leaves, peeked out from behind a mailbox. Its eyes locked with hers, and it didn't move. Lila blinked. The puppy stayed still, its little body tense, but its expression wasn't angry or scared. It was curious, maybe even hopeful. She took a small step forward, then another. But before she could get close, the puppy ducked back behind the mailbox. "Hey there," she said softly, not too loud, careful not to scare it. No reaction. She knelt on the sidewalk, backpack slipping from her shoulders, and waited. A minute passed, then two. The puppy slowly peeked out again. Lila smiled. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." Still, the puppy didn't come any closer. Lila sighed and stood up. She was going to be late. As she walked on, she kept glancing back, and every time she did, the puppy had moved forward just a little, keeping the same distance between them like an invisible string tied them together. He was following her, quietly, hesitantly. By the time she reached the corner near her school, the puppy had stopped at a bush across the street, sitting down, his head tilted, watching her. She waved at him. He didn't move. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about those eyes. They weren't just sad. They were asking something. The next morning, Lila packed an extra sandwich in her lunch bag. Not for herself, but for the little puppy who didn't say a word, but somehow still managed to ask for help. The next morning, Lila walked slower. Her eyes scanned the street corners, the bushes, the fences. She didn't see him at first, and her heart sank a little. Maybe he'd moved on. Maybe he'd gotten scared. But then, just as she passed the old oak tree near the community park, she saw a flash of fur. There he was, half hidden behind a pile of leaves, watching her again. This time, she didn't say anything. She just reached into her backpack, pulled out the sandwich she had packed, and laid it gently at the base of the tree. Turkey and cheese, cut in half. She didn't wait. She walked a few steps away and turned her back. Behind her, she heard the softest crunch of leaves. She peeked over her shoulder and saw him. Nose pressed to the sandwich, tail wagging faintly. He ate slowly, carefully, like he wasn't used to getting a full meal. When he finished, he looked up. Their eyes met again. Lila didn't smile this time. Instead, she spoke quietly. "Are you going to keep following me?" The puppy didn't answer, of course, but as she turned to head toward school, she heard the tiniest patter of paws behind her. Not too close, always just enough space to keep her in sight. He followed her all the way to the last stoplight before the school grounds. When the crowd of students grew thicker, he stopped and sat behind a tree. He watched her go with the same silent intensity. He didn't whimper or bark. He just waited. It became a routine. Every day for the next week, Lila brought food. Sometimes it was a boiled egg. Sometimes it was chicken. Once it was a few slices of ham wrapped in a napkin. And every time, the puppy appeared like clockwork. She started calling him Dusty. His fur was a dull golden brown, covered in dirt and little leaves, and he always seemed to find the dustiest corners to hide in. He never let her touch him. Not yet, but his tail wagged a little faster each day. There was something deeper happening, something unspoken. It wasn't just that he needed her. She was starting to feel like maybe, in some way, she needed him too. and though he hadn't made a sound since the day they met, his eyes continued to ask the same silent question. Can I trust you? Layla's routine with Dusty grew into something steady, something she looked forward to every day. She began waking up earlier, just so she could leave the house in time to catch a glimpse of him. Some mornings, she'd see him from the corner of her eye, waiting by the same tree or behind the mailbox. Other times, he'd be pacing a few steps behind her as she walked, his little body keeping the same distance, as if respecting some unspoken rule. Each day, Layla brought something new. Sometimes a half sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Other times, a warm bowl of water. She'd set it down on the curb, step back, and wait. And every time, Dusty would appear, at first cautious, but more confident with each passing day. He'd eat slowly, glancing up at her from time to time, as if checking to see if she was still there. The more Layla offered him, the more Dusty seemed to trust her. There was no barking, no wagging at first, just a careful, almost solemn acceptance of what she gave him. But with each meal, a little more of the fear seemed to slip away. And then, one day, she saw it, a faint wag of his tail. It wasn't much, just a twitch. But it was enough to make Layla smile. She didn't get too excited, though. This wasn't some instant transformation. It would take time. One afternoon, after a particularly rainy morning, Layla found Dusty hiding under the same bush he often sat near. His fur was matted with mud, and his little body was shivering. As she crouched down to check on him, she noticed something new. He wasn't running away this time. "Are you okay, Dusty?" she asked softly, just like she had been doing every day. This time, her voice had a little more tenderness. He didn't move, but his eyes were different now. Less fearful, more trusting, as if he knew she wouldn't hurt him. As if in some quiet, unseen way, he had started to understand that she wasn't going anywhere. For the first time, she reached out and gently touched his head. His fur was damp and rough, but it didn't matter. Dusty didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He stayed still, eyes closing for a moment as if letting the touch sink in. And in that moment, Layla realized something. It wasn't just that he had started trusting her. It was that she had started trusting him too. Their bond wasn't something that could be measured by the number of meals shared or the touch of a hand. It was something deeper. It was quiet, unspoken, and growing stronger every day. And neither of them was alone anymore. It was an unexpected storm. The skies darkened in minutes, clouds rolling in like thick, gray blankets, and then the rain came crashing down, drenching everything in its path. Layla had just left school when she felt the first heavy drop on her cheek, followed by the sudden rush of wind. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, picked up her pace, and hoped she could make it home before the storm fully hit. But as she reached the end of the block, she saw something that made her stop. Dusty was there, just beyond the school gate. He was sitting on the sidewalk, his tiny body soaked through, shivering uncontrollably. His fur was clumped together in wet patches, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. The rain fell harder, turning the ground into a muddy mess. He didn't seem to know where to go. Layla's heart dropped. She rushed forward, not caring if her shoes splashed in the puddles, not caring about the wet clothes that clung to her skin. "Dusty," she called out, breathless. The little puppy looked up at her, his eyes wide and vulnerable. For a moment, he didn't move, as if unsure whether to trust her or not. But the cold was unbearable, and the rain was unforgiving. Without another thought, Layla dropped to her knees in front of him, extending her arms as if to offer safety, to offer comfort. Dusty hesitated for just a second before stumbling forward, his tiny paws slipping in the slick puddles. Layla's arms wrapped around him, pulling him close to her chest, and she felt the warmth of his little body against hers. His fur was wet, and he was trembling all over, but he didn't try to escape. "I've got you," she whispered softly, running her fingers through his damp fur. "You're okay now." As she held him, Layla could feel his heart racing, his little body still tense with uncertainty. She wasn't sure what had happened to him or why he'd been abandoned, but it didn't matter anymore. In this moment, she wasn't just a girl walking to school. She was someone who could make him feel safe again. Leela stood up, cradling him in her arms, and rushed to the nearest shelter. The old bus stopped just up ahead. As they huddled under the roof, trying to shield themselves from the storm, she could feel Dusty's grip tighten around her. There was no sound but the rain pounding down, but in the quiet of that moment, something changed between them. Dusty wasn't just following her anymore. He was relying on her. And for the first time, Leela realized how much he had already come to mean to her. The storm passed, but the bond between Leela and Dusty only grew stronger. That night, Leela begged her parents to let her keep Dusty inside. They had seen how much the puppy meant to her, but the decision wasn't an easy one. Her father, usually stern and practical, had his doubts. "We're not set up for another pet," he said, glancing at their small, already crowded house. "And we can't just take in every stray we find." But Leila wasn't giving up. She showed them the same quiet determination she had when she convinced them to let her take Dusty to the vet. "Please, just for tonight," she pleaded. "He has no place to go." Her mother, always more compassionate, nodded. "We'll talk about it tomorrow. But for tonight, we'll help him get warm." That night, Dusty slept at the foot of Leela's bed, curled into a small damp ball. He didn't stir much, only shifting slightly in his sleep. Lila sat beside him, her fingers brushing through his wet fur, her heart full of a quiet hope. The next morning, Leela's parents agreed to take Dusty to the vet. It wasn't an easy decision, but they could see how much Leela cared for the little puppy. They weren't sure what the vet would say, but they knew one thing. Dusty wasn't just any stray. He had become something more, a companion, a friend. At the animal clinic, Dusty was examined carefully. The vet was kind but matter-of-fact, explaining that Dusty had been through a lot. His fur was matted with old debris, and he had an old injury to one of his paws that had been left untreated for too long. But aside from being unnerved and anxious, Dusty was, surprisingly, healthy. Leela's heart swelled with relief. He wasn't sick. He was just hurt, emotionally, more than physically. And that was something she knew they could work through together. The vet asked if Leela wanted to hold Dusty as he got a shot to help with the infection in his paw. Without hesitation, Leela agreed. As Dusty winced slightly from the needle, she held his tiny paw in hers, whispering, "You're going to be okay. I promise." For the first time, Dusty looked up at her, really looked up at her, and instead of retreating or flinching, he nuzzled his head into her lap, resting there as if to say, "Thank you." In that moment, Leela realized that Dusty wasn't just a dog she was caring for. He was choosing her, and she had already chosen him right back. As the weeks went by, Dusty's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The little puppy who once cowered at the sound of footsteps, who flinched whenever someone tried to get too close, had begun to trust again. Slowly but surely, Dusty started to open up, first with small steps, then with a full leap of faith. His fur, once dull and matted, began to shine with a healthy glow. His eyes, which had once been filled with fear and uncertainty, now sparkled with joy and curiosity. He wagged his tail more often, and his steps were lighter, less hesitant. No longer did he shrink away from Leela's touch. Instead, he sought it out, curling up beside her at every opportunity. Each night, he slept at the foot of her bed, nestled into the cozy blanket she had set aside for him. But sometimes, if he had a particularly good day, he would curl up in her lap, content to simply be near her. The soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing became as familiar to Leela as the sound of her own heartbeat. Leela's connection with Dusty deepened. She didn't just feed him or give him a warm place to sleep. She saw him. She saw the little gestures, the way his ears perked up when she laughed, how his eyes followed her every move as if trying to understand her every emotion. They communicated in a way that didn't need words. When Leela felt sad, Dusty would nuzzle against her side, offering comfort without asking for anything in return. And when he was happy, when he was happy, he would bound across the room, chasing after his favorite ball, tail wagging furiously, his joy contagious. One Saturday morning, Leela decided to take Dusty to the park. She had heard that there was a local dog park, and she thought it might be good for him to interact with other dogs. At first, Dusty was cautious, keeping close to Leela, unsure of the new surroundings. But as the day wore on, he began to explore, his tail wagging faster as he saw other dogs running, playing, and barking. Dusty's first interaction with another dog was tentative. He sniffed the other dog, circled around, and looked back at Leela, as if seeking reassurance. But the other dog was gentle, and after a few minutes, Dusty was running alongside him, both of them chasing a stick Leela threw across the field. Leela watched them, her heart full of happiness. This was the moment she realized that Dusty wasn't just healing physically, he was healing emotionally too. He wasn't the same scared, lonely puppy who had followed her home weeks ago. He was strong, happy, and full of life. And he had found his place, not just in her home, but in her heart. As the weeks passed, Leela and Dusty's bond grew unbreakable. They became inseparable. Leela couldn't remember a time when Dusty wasn't there, by her side, waiting for her at the door, following her around the house, and even sitting with her during homework, his small head resting on her lap. It was hard to imagine life without him. But as much as Leela adored him, there was a question hanging in the air, one that neither she nor her parents had fully addressed. What would happen to Dusty in the long term? One evening, her parents sat her down in the living room. Her father, who had been uncertain about keeping Dusty at first, cleared his throat. "Leela," he began, his voice soft but firm, "we've been talking, and we think it's time to think about what's best for Dusty. He deserves a permanent home." Leela's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Her mother spoke gently. "What we mean is that we should look into putting him up for adoption. There are lots of families who would love a dog like Dusty, and they could give him a good life. We don't want to keep him here if we're not able to provide everything he needs." Leela's stomach twisted into knots. "But he's my dog. He's my best friend. I can't just let him go." Her father's voice softened. "I know, honey. We've seen how much you care about him. But we have to do what's best for him in the long run. He deserves a family that can give him more attention and care than we can." Leela felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this conversation was coming. Her parents weren't cruel. They were just being practical. But that didn't make the choice any easier. That night, after dinner, Leela went upstairs to her room, her heart heavy. She sat by the window, watching the sunset, and Dusty hopped up beside her. He didn't bark or demand attention. He simply lay down, resting his head on her knee, as he always did. Leela ran her fingers through his fur, and she felt something stir inside her. "I'm not giving up on you," she whispered to him, her voice barely a breath. As she looked at Dusty, something in her heart clicked. She had never truly thought about what it would mean to lose him. But in that moment, she realized she couldn't let him go. Not after everything they had been through together. Leela picked up the pen from her desk and began to write a letter. She didn't know exactly what she was going to say, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let Dusty leave her life without a fight. The next morning, Leela's parents were still discussing what to do about Dusty. Leela, however, had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let Dusty leave, no matter what. He had become more than just a pet. He had become her best friend, her constant companion, and her heart ached at the thought of saying goodbye. That morning, when her father entered the kitchen, Leela was already sitting at the table, her letter in hand. She had been up for hours, carefully choosing her words, and now it was time to present it. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly, and handed the letter to her father. "I want to keep Dusty," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I know it's a big responsibility, but I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. I've already started saving up my allowance, and I promise I'll take care of him. Please, don't make him leave." Her father looked down at the letter, his expression softening. He had been prepared to tell her that they needed to find Dusty a new home, but something in Leila's eyes, the sincerity and strength of her words, made him hesitate. He glanced at her mother, who nodded, a small, encouraging smile on her face. "You really care about him, don't you?" her father asked, his voice softer than it had been just a few days ago. "I do," Leila replied, her eyes filled with unwavering love. "I can't imagine life without him." There was a long pause as her parents exchanged glances. Leila held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, her father spoke. "All right," he said, his voice gentle. "We'll make it work. You've proven to us that you're serious about this, and Dusty has become part of the family. We'll give it a try, Leila." Leila's eyes welled up with tears of joy, and she rushed to hug him. Thank you," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. Dusty, sensing the shift in the air, padded into the kitchen and stood at Leila's feet, looking up at her with his big brown eyes. Leila knelt down and scooped him up into her arms, hugging him tightly. "You're staying with me, Dusty," she whispered, "forever." From that day on, Dusty never had to worry about where he would go. He was home, and so was Leila. They were no longer two souls wandering through life, uncertain of what the future held. They were a team, and nothing would ever separate them again. As Leila and Dusty walked home from school together every day, side by side, it was clear that the little puppy who had once been lost and alone had found the place he belonged. And Leila had found something she had been searching for all along, someone to love, someone who would always be by her side. Their journey together was just beginning, but one thing was certain. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, with love and loyalty.